Hey, 7th grade! It is Wednesday, April 8th, and today we are going to talk about Paul's missionary journey. So, Paul's really excited because the story's about him, and I'm excited because I'm really excited to talk about missions and missionaries and all of that stuff. So, today, I hope you have a Bible with you. We are going to use a PowerPoint today. You don't need to take notes from this, but you, of course, can if you would like. And then after doing the PowerPoint, you will then be doing an assignment, which should be pretty easy after seeing the example of how I do it in the PowerPoint. So I'll switch over now to the PowerPoint and make sure you have your Bible ready. Okay, so we are going to be talking about Paul's missionary journeys, and you can see from this slide that this is covering a lot of chapters in the Bible. We are obviously not going to read all of those today, but I just wanted you to know that this section covers about half of the book of Acts, so it's pretty significant in the Bible. So first, let's just review to make sure that we know who it is we are talking about. So we are looking at Paul, and I want you to make sure you know who Paul is. So is this Paul? Well, yes, but that's not the Paul that we're talking about in the Bible. So I want you to remember the conversion lesson that we did a while ago. So we talked about how Saul became Paul, and we talked about his conversion story. So remember, at the very beginning, he was persecuting Christians and trying to make them believe that Jesus was not the Messiah or the Son of God. And then he met God on the way to Damascus, and as a result, he completely changed. And then after his conversion, he became a believer in Jesus and in his power. And then he started telling everybody about Jesus. And that's how he then started becoming a missionary, because he was so passionate about Jesus at that point after he was converted. So we're going to look at his mission today. A mission is just something that you do, that you are a task that you're performing, that you're set out on with a goal to accomplish. So Paul's mission after his conversion was to tell people about Jesus. He wanted everyone to know who Jesus was. So he went out into the world to do that, to share that news. And that was all of his mission, his goal. Everything that he did after that point was for that purpose. Now, to do this, he went on several journeys, and he traveled with different people who were also missionaries and helping him with this goal. I just want to show you the maps of the journeys that he went on so you can see how he traveled. So this is a picture of his first journey, and you can see, if you go down to the bottom right, you can see starting in Jerusalem, and he's traveling around to a lot of different places. But that one was the first one, so he didn't go quite as far. But now if you see the second one, he expanded his territory of travel and went all the way over to Greece, in places like Athens and Corinth. And then the third journey was back to a lot of the same places. So in the third journey, he's returning to places he's already been and encouraging the people there that became believers and strengthening the churches. So he went on 3 missionary journeys. And there was a 4th journey that he went on, but that one was after he got arrested, and they were taking him to Rome to be tried. So that one doesn't really count as a missionary journey like the first 3. So what we're going to do today is look closely at just one of the stories that happened on one of his journeys to kind of examine how he accomplishes this mission. And then after I do this example, you will do another example with different verses for your assignment. So what we're going to be reading from is Acts 14. So you can turn there in your Bible to Acts 14. I'll put some of the verses on the PowerPoint, but not all of them. So Acts 14, verse 7. So our first question that we're going to ask is, what was Paul's mission? Or in other words, what was he trying to accomplish on this journey? And I'll give you a hint with this one. The answer is going to be the same every time, and I've already kind of told you the answer. But let's read the first verse to see that it's actually specifically said there. Acts 14, verse 7. And there they continued to preach the gospel. Right? So he's continuing to preach the gospel. So his mission is always about preaching about Jesus, telling people the good news. That's why he went. That's why he made the effort to travel around to a lot of places. And travel back then was not easy. And a lot of difficult things happened, but he cared so much about preaching to people about Jesus and making sure that they know that Jesus is the Son of God and their Savior, that he was willing to sacrifice a lot for that. So that's his mission. Okay, now the second part is looking at the details of how did he do that. So what did Paul do to accomplish this mission? List at least 3 actions that he did in this story that helped him do this. Okay, so now we're going to read the main part of the story, and as we read, think about what are the things that he's doing that are accomplishing this. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and read verses 8 to 18, and I want you to follow along or just listen and think about what actions is Paul doing here that accomplish the mission of preaching about Jesus. So this is Acts 14, starting in verse 8. Now at Lystra there was a man sitting who could not use his feet. He was crippled from birth and had never walked. He listened to Paul speaking. And Paul, looking intently at him and seeing that he had faith to be made well, said in a loud voice, "Stand upright on your feet." And he sprang up and began walking. And when the crowd saw what Paul had done, they lifted up their voices, saying in Lycaonian, "The gods have come down to us in the likeness of men." Barnabas they called Zeus, and Paul Hermes, because he was the chief speaker. And the priest of Zeus, whose temple was at the entrance to the city, brought oxen and garlands to the gates, and wanted to offer sacrifice with the crowds. But when the apostles Barnabas and Paul heard of it, they tore their garments and rushed out into the crowd, crying out, "Men, why are you doing these things? We also are men, of like nature with you, and we bring you good news, that you should turn from these vain things to a living God, who made the heaven and the earth and the sea and all that is in them. In past generations he allowed all the nations to walk in their own ways. Yet he did not leave himself without witness. For he did good by giving you rains from heaven and fruitful seasons, satisfying your hearts with food and gladness." Even with these words, they scarcely restrained the people from offering sacrifice to them. Okay, so that's the main part of the story. And at this point, I would ask you, if we were in class, to tell me what were the things that he did in the story to accomplish the mission. So think about that for a second. So the first part, in the very first part of the story, we encounter this cripple, and Paul is speaking, and then he actually heals this man. So we have 2 things happening here. Paul is speaking to the people, and he healed a crippled man and gave him the ability to walk. So there are two actions already that he is doing. And then we have this crazy part where all the people think that Paul and Barnabas are gods and start trying to sacrifice to them. And what Paul does is he stops the people and he tells them, no, stop worshiping us, you need to worship God. So here we have Paul pointing people to God instead of himself. Because he could have taken the glory for that. He could have been like, oh yeah, you can worship me. I just did this amazing thing. But he was making sure to always tell people about God, because that's his mission. Right? So there's three things that he did. He spoke to the people, he healed someone, and he pointed people to God. Okay, the next question is, what did other people do to try to stop Paul from accomplishing his mission? Now, this is important because a lot of times when Paul was on his missionary journeys, there were people that were trying to stop him. People that didn't believe in Jesus, that sometimes were jealous or upset because Paul was getting attention, pulling it away from them, or for various reasons. Now in the part that we read so far, nobody tried to stop him. So that's why we're going to read a couple more verses so we can see how this happened. So verse 19 and 20. But Jews came from Antioch and Iconium, and having persuaded the crowds, they stoned Paul and dragged him out of the city, supposing that he was dead. But when the disciples gathered about him, he rose up and entered the city, and on the next day he went on with Barnabas to Derbe. Okay, so if you don't know what stoning is, that was one of the ways that they would execute people back then, with taking very large stones and throwing them at a person repeatedly until he was dead. And so this is what they're doing here. They are stoning him. They're trying to kill him. And so what we have is other people trying to stop him by stoning him, trying to stone him to death because of what he was preaching. These Jews had come from other towns following him because he was saying these things, and they're trying to get him to stop. So they're very determined to prevent him from accomplishing his mission. And then our last question is, how did God or Jesus or the Holy Spirit, any of the above, help Paul accomplish his mission? So what is God doing to help him, because he's not doing this by himself? Whenever we go out on a mission for God, God is always with us and he is present. Now in the verses, it doesn't specifically say directly, God did this. In these verses, the only time that God is mentioned is when Paul is talking about him. However, that doesn't mean God's not doing something. So what we have to do is we have to make some inferences. If the text doesn't say it directly, we have to think, well, how would these things be accomplished? Does Paul really have the power himself to heal or something like that? Or does he get that power from God, which we know to be true because of what Jesus said and what the Bible tells us? So what we can infer, for example, from this story, is that God protected Paul and kept him alive, even when he was being stoned by the Jews. So even though normally when a person gets stoned, they die, and the people that were doing it even thought Paul was dead, God kept him alive. God protected him and kept him safe. Obviously, he would have been hurt through that, but he was not dead, because in verse 20, it says that he rose up and went on to the next place. So we know that God protected him. So that's just one example of how we can look at one of Paul's missionary journeys and the stories of what he was doing to see how he accomplished the mission of telling people about Jesus and spreading that news all over the world. So now you're going to follow that example. So there is a document called Paul's Journeys on Moodle, and you're going to read the verses that are listed on that document. It's from a different chapter, and then you'll fill in the answers following my example. The questions are the same as the questions that we did in this example, but your verses are different, so your answers will be slightly different based on the verses that you're reading. And that assignment is due Wednesday, April 15th, because Monday we don't have school because of Easter Monday. So you have a whole week to get this assignment done, but I recommend doing it right away and getting it done so you can really enjoy and celebrate your Easter with your family. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.